What should have been an ordinary mission to stop the Maulers ended up becoming the day Mark Grayson's life changed forever, as he picked a fight against his most fearsome enemy yet, Angstrom Levy. This multiversal madman made it his life goal to ruin Mark's. But how did it reach to the point where we see Invincible destroy the world, kill Eve, and eat humans? Well, first we need to understand that Angstrom wasn't always a villain, so just how did this would-be messiah turn to the dark side and become so horrifying? You see, he was born with the unique ability to open portals between dimensions. There is a limit to this, however. He can only open a portal to a parallel universe of the same location. For example, when he wanted to break the Maulers out of an underground prison, he needed to find a dimension with a crater in it to meet them at their exact location. The nature of these powers allowed Angstrom to witness the best and worst of each world. This look at other realities offered him what he believed was a way to save the multiverse. Whilst his own dimension had problems like war, famine, and cancer, he had found other places where these issues had been solved, and this is where his plan began to take shape. If he could learn the secrets of these other worlds, then he could turn his own dimension into a utopia before saving every other dimension as well. There was a problem though. Whilst he could simply ask other versions of himself questions one at a time, Angstrom believed that this was too slow and limited, saying that only someone who can see the whole puzzle can put it together. He needed the same level of understanding that only a local of each universe would have in order to fully know what was going to be best. And that is why he approached the Mauler twins, scientific supervillains who constantly copy their own brains into perfect clones of themselves. The idea being that if they could send minds from one body to another like they did with Robot and Rex, then maybe they could send multiple minds into one as well. Thus, Angstrom could learn the secrets of every universe and become the smartest man in existence, capable of solving any and all problems. He was just moments away from this reality when... oh yeah! Mark started booty blasting the blue boys like it was just another day at the office. Things got weird though when reinforcements arrived. Angstrom was so desperate to become the savior of the multiverse that he called for reinforcements from other parallel Maulers. The plan was to hold Mark off long enough for Angstrom's brain procedure to finish. The plan failed. Mark found himself on an early deathbed after 8 Maulers turned out to be too strong. Angstrom begged them to spare Mark, as pacifism and peace are kind of his whole thing. He wants to be the good guy after all, and being reborn into a world with a dead kid at your feet is probably not the ideal starting point. However, the Maulers refused, and in an act of desperation, Angstrom removed his helmet, causing the machine to overload and explode, killing all but one of the Maulers in the process. That wasn't the only problem though. The original Angstrom Levy was dead and instead replaced by a new version, an amalgamation of all the other Angstrom's minds. He had now become every version of himself at once. Not a pretty sight. By removing the helmet to save Mark, Angstrom had destroyed all of his plans for the future as well as his own body. But that couldn't be right. He couldn't be the one to blame for this, could he? No. He needed someone to blame. Mark Grayson. But why him? What did Mark do to deserve having Angstrom make it his new life goal to see him dead? Whilst in the comics it was because Mark up his little science project, the truth is because in most other universes, Mark decided to join his father, Omni-Man, and conquer the planet. 99% of Angstroms in existence had experienced their friends and families be wiped out by Mark. They see him as the ultimate evil, and because all their memories are now jumbled together in one body, they pin the explosion, the failure of the procedure, and their new hideous body on Invincible. And so the multiverse could wait. Angstrom's new goal was to hunt down Mark and kill him for taking everything from him. But look at this dude. Bro's in no shape to fight against a freaking Viltrumite prodigy, is he? Therefore, he had to make a pit stop in another universe to get the best medical attention available from a race called the Technicians. On the other hand, Mark's life was no different. A couple trips to space, watching his dad tongue a bug, adopting a new baby brother. Okay, maybe it was kind of wild.
wrong. That's crazy.
Things were only gonna get much worse for him though, following a phone call about his mother being in big trouble. By the time he made it home, Mark found his mother crying and bleeding as she held Oliver. It was all Angstrom's doing. He revealed how he knew all about Mark, saying that in 40% of realities his identity was public, and says that he knew how violent Mark could get when angry. He further explains that no matter which dimension Angstrom went to, no one could fix his brain, and so he would always be a freak. But it's the fan when he slaps up Debbie, sending Mark into demon mode. As he charges towards his nemesis, a portal opens between them, sending Invincible to a talking dinosaur dimension. A few minutes later, Mark could find himself back in his own world with Angstrom holding Oliver. He revealed his goal to kill Mark and said that he'll keep sending him to other dangerous universes until he is dead. But if Mark really does end up being... it doesn't matter, because Angstrom knows that his family isn't, and so he will just settle for hurting Mark by killing them. Their battle continues with Mark visiting Spider-Man, Batman, and even the Walking Dead, but each time he ends up at home, with his family at risk and Angstrom shit-talking out his ass. But as they say, around, find out. Angstrom breaks Debbie's arm, but at the same time is taken through one of his own portals by Mark because he was dumb enough to check up on the young superhero. Thanks to the medical treatment Angstrom received from the technicians though, he was now strong enough to throw hands. Thus, the two got a taste of the real multiverse of madness before arriving at a barren, empty desert. Angstrom continues to tease Mark about what he's gonna do to his mother before things go quiet. As Mark's flurry of punches come to an end, he realizes that he may have broken the #1 rule of being the protagonist. He had beaten Angstrom to a bloody pulp so bad that it's getting blurred. Alright, cheers Mark. He found himself shocked as he thought Angstrom would be stronger. There should be no way he died. Which is when the magnitude of what Mark just did began to settle in. Not only did he murder a man, he was now trapped in this ultimate dimension. Mark tried telling himself that he didn't mean to kill Angstrom. After all, that would just be proving his interpretation of Invincible to be correct. An angry killer like Omni-Man. But even if just for a moment, Mark had become just like his dad, willing to kill anyone in his way. This also goes along with Mark's brother Oliver, who does not understand what's wrong with killing villains. He believes that it's for the greater good to kill one to save 1,000, a position Mark would oppose heavily, forcing Oliver to label him a hypocrite as he supposedly killed Angstrom here. Little did Mark know though that Angstrom had the most plot armor in the history of the entire multiverse. After Mark turned his face into a pancake and wandered off in shock, Angstrom used the very last of his energy to open a portal back to the technicians. He was getting the treatment he needed, whilst Mark was lucky enough to be saved by future versions of his friends who travelled through time and space to find him. But once Angstrom had recovered, it was time for him to begin preparations for a war so grand it would put the Earth at risk. He spent months secretly spying on Mark's day-to-day activities, planning his next move. A true Viltrumite invasion, marking the beginning of one of the darkest days in history, the Invincible War. Angstrom travelled to other dimensions, gathering 16 alternate versions of Invincible and convinced them to invade Mark's world and ruin his reputation in return for helping them expand their own empires across the multiverse. These included some of the very worst of what Mark could have become. I've written a full list of every version of Mark on our website, which you can find in the description, but the main ones we need to make note of are the following. The first version was one familiar with fighting against Rexplode in his own universe. During the second day of the war, he badly injured both Monster Girl and Bulletproof before eventually dying to Rexplode, who had to sacrifice himself to gain victory. Another version had killed his own Atom Eve, but had done so quickly, thus he wanted to take the time to kill this Mark's Eve. Because of him being patient with killing her though, she escaped to join up with her own Invincible. This Mark didn't stop here though, as he destroyed Paris on the third day before eventually being stranded in an all too familiar desert world alongside some other Marks, one of which was an Invincible who killed his universe's Debbie and tried to kill his father too, but Omni-Man came out on top, destroying their home. He battled against Oliver Grayson during the war and by day 3 destroyed Sydney before arriving at Mark's home, happy to see that it was still in one piece in this universe. No time to reminisce though, as he he too was sent to the desert. There was then a version of Invincible that adorned the uniform of the Viltrum Empire and went on a violent rampage across Earth during the war before meeting a gruesome end in the desert world like many others. The next mark isn't actually inspired by Invincible at all actually, and is instead a reference to another one of the greatest characters in fiction, Anakin Skywalker, recognizable by the scorch marks on his skin. He spent a year in a Viltrumite prison before arriving in the war where he'd swear to get revenge on his father. By day 3, he had destroyed Moscow and also got stranded with the other marks, one of which annihilated London and another Tokyo, but the two most evil versions are for sure Sinister Mark and Mohawk Mark, who we will get onto in just a moment, because with all these marks now in one place, Invincible's legacy was ruined as the world witnessed what the young Viltrumite was capable of. Thus, phase 1 of Angstrom's plan was complete. He was ready for phase 2, disfiguring him. Which, I guess, I don't know, it just feels like a little bit of a step down from destroying most of his planet. With Mark's name ruined though, Angstrom's hatred for Invincible persisted as he turned on the others, banishing them to the desert dimension, which is just poor planning as our Mark arrives moments later and jumps his ass. Oliver convinces Mark to kill Angstrom there and now, but at the last moment the big-brained dumbass opens a portal to escape, only losing an arm in the process. As per, he heads to the technicians to heal himself, but realizes that this healthcare ain't free.
You don't have free healthcare, do you?
He's got to work for them now, using his intellect to help rebuild their planet. Upon doing so, he finally earned his freedom and was given free reign to return home. And Angstrom couldn't be happier. His arch nemesis, Invincible, was dead. He's got a strut in his step, he's going for jogs, he just saw you can use code ABD to get 10% off gamer subs. Life was perfect. That is until he opens a newspaper to see that Invincible is very much still alive. Thus, Mark's biggest hater returned. Just like before, he breaks into the boy's home, this time getting his hands on a pregnant Eve who can't use her powers. History repeats itself once more with Mark arriving to battle Angstrom only to be banished to the desert. But despite there being 8 Invincibles sent here during the war, only 2 remain. Why? Meet Sinister Mark. In his universe, he turned evil due to the death of his mother. Things were only made worse due to the nature of his planet being the most twisted of them all. He went on to rule his own empire, which is where we got a little taste of human flesh, which he loved. Thus, he became addicted to cannibalism and the torture of his enemies. He was actually the reason all the other Invincibles got abandoned by Angstrom in the first place, after Sinister Mark suggested killing the multiversal Megamind following the death of many Mark variants. And so, with nowhere left to go and no food in sight, Sinister Mark got busy. He battled his multiversal counterparts, devouring them one by one. Meanwhile, Angstrom was lecturing Eve about how in many of the worlds where Mark became evil, she was the cause. She had been hurt or killed, causing him to snap. These two get into it about whether or not Mark was to blame for what happened to Angstrom, with Eve eventually asking if he ever considered what he would be capable of if he just didn't beef with a teenager, if he still could have saved dimensions despite being disfigured. Hearing this, Angstrom pauses. For the first time in his life, that fat-ass brain of his was met with an ounce of logical thought. That's right, Eve gives Naruto a run for his money, hitting Angstrom with an insane level of Torque no Jutsu, causing him to open up the portal to free Mark, realizing that he has made a severe and continuous lapse in judgment. Things didn't go smoothly though. Whilst Angstrom became enlightened, Invincible had to deal with his sinister variant. Luckily, he was saved by Mohawk Mark. In his universe, he came to understand that he was genetically superior to the rest of planet Earth. Thus, he wanted to rule over humanity and sought the help of the Teen Team so that he could achieve this. For a moment, Atom Eve actually considered joining, before Mohawk Mark killed Rexplode, making her realize that this dude was unhinged. This marked the start of his rampage. He killed Eve, Kate, who he believed was Robot, Thaddeus, Thula, and even Omni-Man, leaving him in charge charge of the Viltrum Empire. Despite this, he and the main Mark bond in the desert until Angstrom comes to save them following his change of heart. He apologizes to the main Mark, realizing that this is one of the very few dimensions where he's actually a good person. He sees the truth and surrenders, accepting any punishment for the lives he took. That wasn't the only punishment he had to accept though. After all, he promised Mohawk Mark that he could expand his empire, which turned out to be a lie. Thus, this unhinged Invincible grabs Angstrom and takes him back to his own world through a portal. Realizing the threat he poses, Mark, with Robot's help, is able to open a portal of their own to Mohawk Mark's world to make sure Angstrom hasn't continued his career as a supervillain. Little did he realize that the supervillain was in front of him all along. Mohawk Mark had tortured Angstrom within an inch of his life, hoping to get the secrets of his multiverse hopping powers out of him. That way, he could expand his empire himself. Realizing that Invincible was seemingly destined to rule the world one way or another, Robot killed Mohawk Mark and Angstrom Levy whilst abandoning Invincible in the foreign dimension. Whilst this marked the end of Angstrom's journey across the multiverse though, his legacy lived on. Many years later, his son went out in search of Mark to get revenge for his father, who had since been entirely erased from the multiverse. The message to take from all this though is that even if you're an ugly ass dude, you can still get some. Now, if you want to enjoy more peak fiction, then you have to make sure that you click on this video on your screen right now.